There's something sinister below the Denver International Airport, Part 1. Around a year ago, a gentleman named Mark was hired by the DIA to work on its concourse train system. At the time of his hiring, Mark had just moved to Colorado and was struggling to find a job, so he applied to the DIA, the Denver International Airport. And much to his surprise, as he had no experience, they hired him to work on the lower levels at the train station. Many don't know it, but there's actually a little train located under the DIA, and it runs between each concourse. These are concourses A, B, and C, and they are each of the buildings that make up the Denver airport. He had a really easygoing boss, the job paid well, and it was pretty straightforward, so Mark was really enjoying it at the time. The train itself required a lot of maintenance to keep it up and running, so Mark kept busy working 50 to 60 hours a week. And of course, the train couldn't be shut down during the day, so they would have to decommission it at night and clean the components once a week. So for Mark, the vibe was right. Everything was going good in his life. He had a steady job, money in his pockets, and he was even beginning to enjoy Colorado. Mark's good life went on for months, until one night when he was covering somebody's shift at the DIA, everything changed. At the time of the incident, Mark was no stranger to the conspiracy theories surrounding the Denver International Airport. Being that he was the new guy, he was the recipient of all the old spooky tales that the veterans were eager to tell to somebody new. Like the tale of Blucifer, the big blue horse that stands in front of the DIA. Known for killing its creator, Blucifer is said to represent end times and the coming apocalypse. Rumor has it his red-hot eyes can glow deep into your soul, and they can drive the most sane man mad. Or that the Freemasons and Illuminati are rooted deep within the culture below the DIA. This is represented in what look like beautiful murals and paintings scattered throughout the walls. And we can't forget the underground tunnels and the shape of the airport itself. Or the incident that took place almost a decade ago, when 14 different planes' windshields just shattered out of nowhere. Though it was labeled a weather-related anomaly, many believe that it was from electromagnetic pulse testing done deep within the underground tunnels. But what the population doesn't know is these are the public's theories. The real ones have been passed down from generation to generation of employees who worked there. These accounts have an even more evil ring to them, too. What's below the DIA airport? Part 2. He heard most of the older conspiracies from the janitors that had been there since the 90s. For example, the ones that had worked in the underground tunnels had heard a loud moaning sound, one that was both high and low pitched, like it was from a crowd of people. For the most part, they only heard this loud moaning at night, and they said sometimes it would drive them crazy. There was also the story of the employee who got lost, and he was lost for a few days trying to find his way to the top. And apparently, he stumbled upon a room that had weird glyphs all over it, and a keypad like nothing he had ever seen. This keypad was mounted on the wall, and they called it the keypad to nowhere. Luckily, he didn't press any of the buttons. He found his way out and was okay. In Concourse 23, that was supposedly located below the abandoned automatic baggage tunnels. This area is said to have ties with the Army or even German military. And one of the janitors, they called him Old Tom because he had been there since the opening of DIA, complained about a supersonic frequency or noise that bothered him regularly. He claimed this noise would make him feel ill to his stomach, or kind of stupid, foggy, like he couldn't think. He believed it was some sort of mind control experiment. But this new employee really didn't buy into all that. Though he liked to hear the stories, he didn't believe any of them had merit. But he goes on to say that there is something oddly eerie about the place, very unusual, and that the locals, when building the DIA, were very angry at the costs and how much it kept going up as the project went on. Their main complaint was that the previous airport, the Stapleton, didn't really have anything wrong with it, and that there was no need to build a new airport. And it was built in the middle of nowhere, in a low valley no less. So people have been skeptic about it since the day it was built. For the most part, this gentleman believed that the conspiracies were fantasy, that they had no backing and were mostly just to poke fun at new guys. But there was one conspiracy in particular that did intrigue him, and it was because he worked by it every day. This one was about the locked door in the underground tunnels between Concourse B and C. It seemed to be tucked away nicely in between the fans that propelled the train forward. And virtually every employee who had worked in the underground tunnels had tried to use every key they had to open it, but no one could. 3. What's below the Denver International Airport? Part 3. So all the employees walked by this locked door daily, and virtually every one of them had tried to use all their keys to open it, but not one of them worked. Some figured it was just a prank by the staff to see who was honest and who would try to open the door. Others figured it was nothing but a maintenance closet with a water heater in it. Nevertheless, a large number of them continued to speculate that it was something like a Masonic meeting room or a tomb. Some even suggested that it was a door that led to an underground military base that kept anti-gravity and alien craft in it. The new guy pondered over it often. He found himself thinking about it when he lay his head down at night. But he really just thought it was some joke or a trick. Nevertheless, his imagination continued to run wild. And as he worked, months went by and nothing out of the ordinary happened. Until one day. It was late at night in the end of his shift and he was getting ready to leave when suddenly he saw the flash of a bright light. In a flicker, he immediately recognized it as a flashlight that was getting pointed towards him, then away from him. Curiously, he walked up to the glass door that separated the underground tunnels from the airport, and he peered in. He figured to see something normal, like a coworker looking for some maintenance items or somebody making their last rounds, but it was far from it. He saw a man kneeling in front of the locked door. He was wearing a pristine black suit and a gas mask. He kept peering over his shoulder as if paranoid, looking up and down the track to make sure nobody was around. He had his back turned so the new guy went unseen, and he watched and observed as he seemed to mess around with a bag or something of the sort. The gloss finish on his black dress shoes shined in the dim light of his flashlight. His mind began racing with thoughts of the conspiracies he had heard from his co-workers. He observed nervously, hoping he was going to enter the locked door, when suddenly he turned around looking at Concourse C, and the new guy slid behind the wall immediately. He did not want to be seen. His heart was in his throat. He stood there briefly, not knowing why he didn't want the man to see him, but he just didn't. And when he had caught his breath, he peered back around the corner. It was black, and the man was gone. After that, he didn't wait around any longer. He left for home immediately, confused and scared. As his head hit the pillow, he couldn't help but replay what he saw in his mind over and over again. He'd show up to work the next day, but he hadn't decided whether he should tell his fellow employees or not. Part 4. What's below the DIA? Part 4. So he shows up to work the next day, dog-tired from being up all night. After getting to work, he decided to ask a coworker that he was closer to about the man. He figured it a good idea to ask her instead of anybody else because he didn't want to be deemed a crackpot or a liar that he was just adding to the lore. As she exited the break room, he quickly walked up to her. "Hey, I saw something last night." She kind of skeptically raised an eyebrow. "Something here," he said. "I picked up a late night shift and I was getting ready to leave when I saw a man dressed in all black in a gas mask by the locked door. He didn't look official, he looked too official," he said. "A gas mask?" she said, clearly not amused. He nods. "I know it's legal here, but take it easy, man," she says. He rolls his eyes and kind of shakes his head. She sighs. It could have just been a Fed checking for an EMP. Or maybe even a second inspector cosplaying, she kind of chuckles to herself. "It is pretty weird, though. Don't tell Tom." They both laughed. He could feel the adrenaline from fear rising like a volcano in his gut. Who was that man, he thought. And as she looked over, she could see the fear in his face. She takes him aside and lowers her voice. "Look, this wouldn't be the first time somebody witnessed seeing some sort of man dressed in all black, mysteriously wandering the corridors. But you're better off to just quit worrying about it and don't ask questions. It's just another day at the office around here." He looked at her and smiled, wondering whether or not she was really being honest or just saying it to appease him. She then winks and walks away. But that night, his worst fears came true. Once again, per a supervisor's request, he had stayed late, as the train was malfunctioning all day, so he wanted him to do one last inspection before he left. It was very late at night, and there was hardly anybody around. He was one of the only ones left in the tunnel. Of course, they would ask me to stay late the night before my 3-day weekend, he thought, as he walked down the tunnel eerily. As he walked towards the train, his heart pounded, as the tunnel was scarier than it had ever been. He felt almost something electric in the air. He pulls out his phone and glances at the time, realizing it's the witch's hour, as his mother always would say. As what seemed like static flowed through the air, he couldn't help but think about the EMPs, when his feet began to feel like heavy bricks. And they kept getting heavier and heavier as he approached the door. He looks over, and sure enough, it's open. He looked around him to make sure nobody was watching, and noticed a bright fluorescent light emanating from the room. He sees no one's around and steps in. 5. He stepped in, squinting his eyes because the glare was so bright, but he could see the rest of the room after they adjusted. It was about 300 square feet, and it was made of a light, steel-like metal. It was completely empty. There wasn't a soul in sight. On both sides of the room were 2 heavy doors. One was pitch black, and the other was pure rust. Both doors were closed. The rusty one was at a slight angle. He glances over at the black door and sees the gas mask. He looked at it for a few moments and even contemplated putting it on, when suddenly, boom! The door to the tunnels slammed shut. Panicked, he sprinted to the door, hoping that it would open without a problem, but it was locked. He ran over to the black door and grabbed the handle. It moved with ease, but he pushed and pulled, and no matter how hard he tried, it just wouldn't open. He slowly turned around and looked at the door covered in rust. It looked almost evil. It was so rusty and seemingly weather-beaten, the flakes of rust were piled up around the front of the door. He approaches it cautiously, grabs the handle, and pushes it down. It opened. At first, it was stuck, but as he gave it everything he had, it finally broke free and made a loud screeching sound as it opened. Inside was a dimly lit staircase that descended to the darkness below. He hesitated for a moment, but his curiosity got the best of him. He took the first step, and before you know it, he was counting 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and he figured he had gone down about 5 stories when they stopped. He glances back up and can barely see the dim light emanating from the top of the stairs. Then enters the corridor. It was complete darkness, but eventually his eyes adjusted, and it seemed the tunnel gave off a red glow. He glances up towards the end of it, and sure enough, an exit sign. He gasped in relief. Eventually, the tunnel opened up to a cavernous area that the height of it seemed so high he couldn't even see it. He glances back at the tunnel and notices that above the doorway there was a sign that said, "The abyss looks back." He walks into the cavern and he can hear his footsteps echoing throughout, when suddenly a light shines from above. It lights up a small metal table in the middle of the room. Under it, a black chair. He approaches and notices a pool of odd liquid surrounding the table, but then sees a black binder on top of it. The top of the binder read, "Hope to God it doesn't happen. In case of a breach, procedure." He grabs the book and flips it open. At the top, it says quarantine procedures. He fumbles it, it hits the table, making a loud noise. He stepped in. As soon as that notebook hit the table, he knew he screwed up, and it started immediately. It began a dull roar, and then almost a hissing sound, with loud screeches throughout it. Mark was looking everywhere, trying to locate the source of the sound, with no luck. When in the dense blackness, he made out what looked to be a large chasm to his left. He moves towards it with caution, because he can barely see the faint edge. He slowly shuffled his way up to it and looked down, and that's when he saw them. It was a sick horde of black bodies. It looked like one entity. They were intertwined with each other, tangled together, always moving. He couldn't tell if it was for pain or pleasure. As he looked around, he could see tunnels laden throughout the wall of the chasm. He was almost in a trance watching them in awe, thinking to himself, "This is almost like a hive." That's when suddenly 30 or 40 of them instantly looked up at him and he could see the whites of their eyes. Mark let out a quick screech and took a couple steps backwards, tripping and falling to the ground. While on the ground, he hears a loud clang behind him. He looks and there's 5 or 6 of them fighting over the metal table and the notebook he was just looking at. He stands up and they all freeze and look at him. They seemed almost baffled. They hadn't seen somebody in possibly decades. Mark is terrified while the creatures seem curious. They cocked their head to the side and let out a loud screech. They suddenly lunged at him and began chasing him. He ran with all his might. He could hear the creatures battling and fighting for the best position, chasing him down, clawing and scratching just to get to him. He didn't even take the time to look back because they were so close to him. He finally started gaining a little distance when he came upon a tall wall. Thinking to himself, God, please let there be an exit. And as he's reaching the wall, he hears a loud whistle to his left. He glances towards the sound and he can't believe his eyes. It's the man in black, wearing his mask, waving at him. Come here, this way. As he was just about to take off, Mark looks back one more time at the Wendigo-like creatures, and they were so wretched, he froze in fear. The agent yells, "Hey!" He snaps out of it and starts running towards him with all of his might. He ran with everything he had. He reached the door and the agent pulled him inside. Not angrily, but as if he was trying to save his life. As Mark passed the threshold of the door, the agent started pushing it shut. He took a couple seconds to gather his wind. He yells, "Thanks!" The agent gives him a thumbs up and points at the stairs. He looks and the stairs lead up to the black door. The Solomon Island Giants and the story of their chief, Luddy McCode. Luddy was born in the 1860s, and it's said he still rules the Giants to this day, as giants live much longer than mankind. The following is his story and what led to the war among the giants of the Solomon Islands. The chief was born to a family that lived in the dense rainforests and mountain ranges of central Guadalcanal, near Mount Papamanassu. The McCode clan had lived in their cave-style abode for centuries, among other clans that also inhabited the mountainous interior of the island. He grew up as any normal giant boy would, gathering taro roots, tapioca plants, and hunting wild pigs, even the occasional coastal person. But as a youngin', something would happen to him that would change he and his people's way of life forever. Oddly enough, what set this whole chain of events in motion was a small tobacco pipe. At the time, they didn't understand the significance of it and how this would actually change the relationship between the giants and the coastal people. Growing up, Luddy's grandmother had very much enjoyed smoking tobacco, and she did so using a white man's tobacco pipe. It had the engraving of a sailing ship on the side of it. The story goes that this tobacco pipe was given to his grandmother by a close friend who had taken it off a coastal person that they had attacked. Well, one evening, while the McCode family were all relaxing together in their cave-style abode, his grandmother, who was a large woman, got up, dropped the pipe, and proceeded to accidentally step on it, breaking it into pieces. At first, his grandmother took it very well, but over time, she was grief-stricken over the loss of her tobacco pipe, as she had been smoking it every day for years, so she grew really attached to it. And as the weeks went by, it only got worse. None of them could do anything to cheer her up. So finally, they came up with an idea. They needed to get her another pipe. The question was, how were they going to get it? Everybody in the family knew that it originally belonged to a white man that had sailed to the islands on one of the tall ships. Then they recalled that from time to time, they observed the white men coming from these ships onto the island and capturing the coastal people, taking them away. So it was decided the next time they saw one of these ships, one of them would go down to the coast and see if they could obtain a pipe from one of these odd-looking white men. But who was going to do it? As they were all so big, they would be made instantly and that would put them in danger. That's when they all glanced at Luddy. He was the youngest of them all at 10 years old and 6 feet tall. These factors made him less likely to arouse suspicion, too. The Chief of the Solomon Island Giant story, part 2. To make him look less conspicuous, they shaved all the hair off Luddy's entire body, and they made him some grass apparel to put around his waist, making him look more like an islander. Apparently, they had even performed some custom religious rituals to give him luck in his journey. Afterwards, they picked a vantage point and began watching for the ships to sail in. Well, it would end up taking weeks for a ship to appear, but eventually one did. It ended up docking in the capital of the Solomon Islands, Honiara. With everything organized and his grandma in mind, Luddy bid farewell to his family and made his way down the mountains towards the large ship. There were hundreds of coastal people gathered around the white men, and he knew if he wanted a pipe, he'd have to get to them. So he made his way through the crowd, and he noticed, after a number of them had offered him glasses and other items, that some of the coastal people were boarding the ship. So he thought, well, maybe there's one on there. But little did he know, those coastal people were boarding the ship as part of the slave trade for the sugarcane fields in Queensland. See, unlike the United States that literally just abolished slavery, the Australian Confederation was now just starting it. And though the coastal people were treated harshly, that was nothing compared to the Aborigines of Australia. They were considered less than animals. A short distance separated Luddy from the white men that he was approaching. He figured that when he got to them, they might let him get on the ship to look for a pipe. But unbeknownst to him, they had already spotted him, and they seductively lured him on board, the entire time thinking what a price they could get for such a strong specimen, even though he was a grotesque-looking Kanaka. Still concerned about his grandmother's pipe, he naively went into the hull of the ship where the other islanders were, and they quickly locked the door behind him. He had no escape. It was at this moment that Luddy knew his mission had just taken a turn for the absolute worst. He quickly became very anxious and scared, but it was too late. They had set sail. During the trip, it didn't take long for the islanders to realize that they were actually in a cell with a small giant. Then some weeks later, after a couple stops, his ship had arrived in Bundaberg, Queensland. They unloaded their precious cargo of slaves in chains and led them up one by one to the auction podium. Big-time farmers from all around the city of Bundaberg gathered and bought each one by one. Then Luddy was brought to the podium, and the crowd gasped at his ugly, grotesque look. The bidding began, and no one said a word. It was about to be a no sale when an old farmer in back raised his hand. Luddy was sold for cheap. Part 3, y'all. The Solomon Island Giants Chief, Part 3. After the worn-out old farmer purchased Luddy, he filled out the necessary paperwork, loaded him onto the wagon, and they made their way. Apparently, the old man and his wife were either in their 60s or 70s, and they never had any children, so they had virtually no help on the farm, and they were just getting simply too old to do the work. So they gathered all their savings, and the old farmer went to the auction in hopes that he could buy a servant that would help them save their establishment. After a few hours of travel, they arrived at the farm. They were greeted by the farmer's wife, who was expecting a regular Kanaka South Sea indentured servant. Instead, what she got was a large, ugly, hairy, Neanderthal-looking thing that had a gapped-out smile that spanned from ear to ear, and it also had massive red, bulging eyes. The farmer pulled him off the wagon and, still in chains, led him to the barn where he made him a bed and gave him some food. Luddy went to bed sad that night about his predicament. Then the old farmer went back inside and got an earful from his wife about the purchase. He explained to her that he had no other option, and they went to bed slightly angry that night. Next morning, he unlocks Luddy's chains and puts him to work. It quickly becomes apparent to he and his wife that he was no ordinary Kanaka, as he had the strength of 3 or 4 men. As the months rolled by, they realized his strength was unparalleled. He could lift the wagon himself while the tire was being changed. He could pick up massive logs and boulders that were virtually impossible for any ordinary man to lift. In one instance, as the old man was plowing the fields, his horse went lame. Luddy, seeing this, put the harness around his neck and finished plowing the fields himself. The old farmer and his wife were very pleased with his work. There was only one problem. He ate like a horse and smelled to high heaven. No matter how many times they scrubbed him down, he still emitted a terrible odor. That year, they'd sell their crops for a profit, so Luddy virtually saved their farm. And as a reward, the old man and his wife took him to the next door neighbors to converse with the other indentured servants. At least that's what they thought. As they arrived on their neighbor's farm, the islander slaves noticed Luddy and instantly knew what he was. So they ran to the sugarcane fields in fear. The neighborly farmer chuckled and sent other servants into the sugarcane after them, and when they brought them back, he asked them why they ran. They tried to explain that he was a giant who ate people, but the farmer just didn't understand. So needless to say, Letty sat by himself that afternoon, and the servants wouldn't even talk to him. This continued every Sunday for the next couple months, but eventually one of the Kanaka would approach Letty. From then on, he began talking to the coastal people regularly. 4. Solomon Island Chief, Part 5. Knowing that his wife wouldn't approve, he didn't tell her. So the next morning, he dressed Letty up in his best clothing, loaded him up on the wagon, and they headed to town. Upon arrival, Bundaberg was teeming with activity. People from all over the district had showed up to see the event. The old man parked his cart, tied up his horse, and told Letty to watch over it as he entered the pub to see what the good word of town was. As he walked in, he saw a couple old friends that he hadn't seen in a long time. He went up to the bar, sat down, and began having conversation with them. They were talking about the boxing event, and one of them jokingly asked the old farmer if he was going to have a go in the ring. He laughed and said, "No, but my Kanaka is," and the entire bar laughed out loud. "A Kanaka," they proclaimed. "You can't throw him in the ring. He'll get pummeled." The old man slams down one more beer. "Well, we'll just have to see, won't we?" And he smiles as he walks out of the bar. Shortly after, the pub slowly empties as the men head down to the tent for the boxing match. Letty and the old farmer make their way down to the tent. Letty is utterly confused. He has no idea what's going on. This was the first time the old man has ever brought him to town. He tells Letty to stay put as he heads up to the attendant and begins talking to him, asking if he can have his Kanaka come into the tent. And he says, "Nope, no way. They're not allowed." "But I brought him to fight in the ring," explained the farmer. The door attendant laughs out loud and says, "You can't have a Kanaka fight in the ring. He'll be killed." Either way, rules are rules. You'll have to go see the owner. So the old man made his way through the crowd to the owner. He explained the situation, and the owner told him, "Let me see him." They get to the wagon, and there sits Letty. The owner looks him up and down and says, "Well, I've never had a Kanaka in the ring before. Why not? Let me make some dough off this black fella." The owner made his way back to the tent and told the door attendant to let the Kanaka in. Then the old man turned to Letty and with a tear in his eye explained the situation and told him that if he wins, he can go back home. But Letty couldn't understand. Still confused, the old man leads Letty to the tent, pays for his entrance, and they head up towards the ring. He watches as two men bare-knuckle box, and one of them seems to fall down dead and then gets drug out of the ring. Afterwards, the owner hops in the ring, grabs the microphone, and yells, "Gentlemen, we have a special treat for you tonight. I have been asked for the first time in Queensland history if a Kanaka can hop in the ring for a round or two." The crowd bursts out laughing. He quiets the crowd and announces his best fighter, a tall German boxer. Then he announces Letty, and as he enters the ring, people are laughing and jeering, teasing him and taunting him. The old man quickly makes his way to the bookie to make the bet. Part 6. Solomon Island Chief, Part 5. Knowing that his wife wouldn't approve, he didn't tell her. So the next morning, he dressed Letty up in his best clothing, loaded him up on the wagon, and they headed to town. Upon arrival, Bundaberg was teeming with activity. People from all over the district had showed up to see the event. The old man parked his cart, tied up his horse, and told Letty to watch over it as he entered the pub to see what the good word of town was. As he walked in, he saw a couple old friends that he hadn't seen in a long time. He went up to the bar, sat down, and began having conversation with them. They were talking about the boxing event, and one of them jokingly asked the old farmer if he was going to have a go in the ring. He laughed and said, "No, but my Kanaka is," and the entire bar laughed out loud. "A Kanaka," they proclaimed. "You can't throw him in the ring. He'll get pummeled." The old man slams down one more beer. "Well, we'll just have to see, won't we?" And he smiles as he walks out of the bar. Shortly after, the pub slowly empties as the men head down to the tent for the boxing match. Letty and the old farmer make their way down to the tent. Letty is utterly confused. He has no idea what's going on. This was the first time the old man has ever brought him to town. He tells Letty to stay put as he heads up to the attendant and begins talking to him, asking if he can have his Kanaka come into the tent. And he says, "Nope, no way. They're not allowed." "But I brought him to fight in the ring," explained the farmer. The door attendant laughs out loud and says, "You can't have a Kanaka fight in the ring. He'll be killed." Either way, rules are rules. You'll have to go see the owner. So the old man made his way through the crowd to the owner. He explained the situation, and the owner told him, "Let me see him." They get to the wagon, and there sits Luddy. The owner looks him up and down and says, "Well, I've never had a Kanaka in the ring before. Why not? Let me make some dough off this black fella." The owner made his way back to the tent and told the door attendant to let the Kanaka in. Then the old man turned to Luddy and with a tear in his eye explained the situation and told him that if he wins, he can go back home. But Luddy couldn't understand. Still confused, the old man leads Luddy to the tent, pays for his entrance, and they head up towards the ring. He watches as two men bare-knuckle box, and one of them seems to fall down dead and then gets drug out of the ring. Afterwards, the owner hops in the ring, grabs the microphone, and yells, "Gentlemen, we have a special treat for you tonight. I have been asked for the first time in Queensland history if a Kanaka can hop in the ring for a round or two." The crowd burst out laughing. He quiets the crowd and announces his best fighter, a tall German boxer. Then he announces Luddy, and as he enters the ring, people are laughing and jeering, teasing him and taunting him. The old man quickly makes his way to the bookie to make the bet. Part 6. The owner rings the bell and the fight is underway, but Luddy is still staring at his owner, the old man. He has no idea what's going on. As a giant, he's never even seen any combat like this. He doesn't understand what kind of stuff mankind is into. So as he's facing away from his opponent, the big German bare-knuckle boxer punches Luddy right in the back. He doesn't even flinch. The massive giant barely felt the punch from the German professional boxer. Then his old friend the farmer busts it out. He pulls out a tobacco pipe, and Luddy's eyes light up. He yells, "If you win, you can have a box." So Luddy turns around and looks at the fighter. He takes another punch to the face, whop, then another right, whop, and then a left, whop. The German boxer steps back, kind of dumbfounded. It doesn't seem he's even fazed Luddy. He can't understand why his punches don't seem to be hurting this 7.5 foot tall man. Luddy just smiles at him. He winds up his right hand and he punches the German as hard as he can right in the chest. The whole crowd gasps in awe and somewhat fear as his hand sinks through the chest of the German boxer. The people standing behind the German for a brief second could see the giant's knuckles imprint protruding from his back. With his fist virtually stuck inside the German's chest, he picks him up with one hand, looks at the farmer, and yells, "I win!" The once laughing crowd fell to pure silence. You could hear a pin drop in that arena. Luddy, not realizing what he had done, was acting almost comical about the situation. The owner hopped on the mic and said, "All right, everybody, fight's over. Head home." The crowd slowly pours out of the arena. Two officers come to the ring and check the fighter's pulse. He is dead. Shortly after, a medical examiner would also check out the German fighter and pronounce him dead as well. Then the officer, owner, and the medical examiner convened, and it didn't take them long to decide it was an absolutely fair fight. Sometimes this happened in bare-knuckle boxing. And even though the giant killed the German fighter, the owner paid up the old man, and he won a sweet purse because he was the only one that bet on Luddy. So in high spirits, he and Luddy went back to the farm. He explained to his wife why he lied and that he was going to send Luddy home. Showed her the winnings and said that they'll buy 12 indentured servants to replace him. That night, he ate dinner inside with the farmer and his wife. The next day, they went to his neighbors and they bought his best friend to help him in the journey back to the Solomon Islands. The following morning, they were on their way back home.